Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for registering for today's webinar, all about the future of hospitality, going beyond and go beyond for evolving guest needs. Welcome, everyone, and thank you. Welcome, especially Matthew Prosser, and thank you to you and the team from Agilisys to help us pull this webinar together today. My name is Jane Pendlebury. I'm the CEO of HOSPA, the Hospitality Professionals Association. It's 10:30 a.m. It's Thursday, January the 9th, and our first webinar of 2025. I can see snow from my office window, and meanwhile there's wildfires burning in California, so a diverse weather across the globe. We're due to be chatting for around 30 minutes today with time for questions at the end, so please do ask your questions throughout using the Q&A option, which is probably at the bottom of your screen. If there's not enough time to answer all the queries, don't worry, we will get back to you afterwards. But let's dive straight in. Matthew, I understand that Agilisys have undertaken another survey, this time about the guest economy, the more detailed findings of which we'll discuss in a lot more detail in the next half hour. But do you want to just sort of set the scene and explain why the study was undertaken?
I will. And first and foremost, Jane, thank you for the opportunity to spend time with you today. Happy New Year to you and Happy New Year to everyone that's listening. Hopefully everyone's warm wherever they are. It's certainly cold where I am today. But yes, it's a very good point, and obviously why we're here for the next half an hour. The I guess main pretense behind what we undertook was really fundamentally around the guest, because everyone on this webinar will know today the guest expects more. All right. We've always thought about the guest in terms of how we look after them. But I think today, more than ever, the guest definitely expects more. And for us, I think as consumers, we are all conditioned around personalization, whether we like it or not. All right. We have become conditioned. All right. Perhaps future generations more so, but for us and for my generation, we're used to it in our lives and we accept it. And it's here to stay. So personalization and how we interact with retail organizations and other organizations is fundamentally about them understanding us as a consumer. And we all have to have the vision to recognize that this is fundamentally important for our industry. I'm as passionate as anyone else on this call. I've spent the last 30 years in this industry. I was an ex-hotelier, ex-operator, and then for some reason moved into the technology world. So I truly understand the needs of this industry. And when we think about the guests, they definitely now want, in inverted commas, my experience. We've always talked about the guest experience, but perhaps we've talked about that generically and perhaps too much in a generic sense. But it's now more about how can I be looked after in relation to the next guest, and how does that differentiate? And those consumer levels of personalization, and I'll bring in examples, and we'll all have heard them before, the likes of Netflix that suggests different viewing habits or trends or behaviors that they recognize and present information to us. Amazon, who knows what we should be buying before we know. All right. And last but not least, and one probably I'm going to labor on a little bit more, is the likes of Uber. Now, again, there's probably every single person on this webinar that's perhaps has used Uber at some point, and we'll all use it for taxis, of course. And years ago, when they set out and embarked upon this project, they took that concept of a car that needed to get you from A to B and decided that we were going to focus on the passenger. All right. And it was the passenger that was king. All right. The passenger was the most important part of this particular process. And if we fast forward to today, I was actually looking on the Uber app this morning in preparation. We all know we can get groceries from Uber. We can get boats from Uber. We can get car hire from Uber. We can get flights from Uber. We can get coaches, trains. They haven't stopped in advancing the offering to the customer. All right. But at the heart is fundamentally the guest. All right. And we believe that this industry, our industry, has for far too long been constrained by only thinking about the room. All right. We've talked and talked for years and years about the room and how we better those rates. But Uber doesn't talk about the car. All right. Or Uber talks about the guest. And it's about time we looked at our industry in a slightly different light. And we wanted to do something about that. We actually conducted our first consumer report about 12 months ago. And it brought us so much information and so much better understanding of the trends and behaviours at that particular time that we always threatened to do another report. And this particular report took us one step further to analyse the, I guess, the needs around that guest. So yeah, I guess just setting the scene that fundamentally the guest absolutely expects more, Jane.
Brilliant. That's a great reason for undertaking the study. So brilliant. Thank you for that. And then when you said about Netflix, I remember hearing that the same show will have different images dependent on who's looking at the. So what would appeal to me might be different to what appeals to you, and then we'll end up watching the same show based on the image. It's very clever. The title of your study is Guest Economy, the Guest Economy. What do you mean by the guest economy?
Well, I believe it's a bit of a wake-up call. All right. And if I labour again on those previous comments around how we need to be guest-centric as an industry, I kind of like relate it to, I mean, I've spent a long time in technology, different organizations. And one thing I resonate well with, certainly in my time with Agilicis, is that Agilicis has actually always looked from a guest-centric perspective, all right, in terms of how we can better understand the behaviors and trends of the guests. And the guest economy is essentially trying to divert attention, thought, focus onto how we can better understand the customer, the guest, the individual that's going to hopefully make our hotel more profitable, rather than just think, well, when they walk into their room, close that door, you know, we're going to earn some revenue out of that guest. But we need to truly understand where else they spend money, all right? And how do we as an organization develop our thought processes, our technologies, our processes to better interpret their needs. And the output of that is ultimately driving efficiencies and more profitability. So that's really what the guest economy is. In one sense, it's a wake-up call to this industry. It's an opportunity for us to divert our attention from certain metrics that we've used for decades and decades, and to begin really thinking about who's at the heart of our business. And it always has been the guest, but it's now time to tailor and leverage technologies that allow us to tailor that guest.
And that new metric that is becoming commonplace, RevPAG, revenue per available guest, it's maybe going to be the new go-to metric. But let's get onto your survey, your study, because there were 5 key areas, wasn't there, that Agilicis have boldly predicted for 2025. So if we go through those one by one, the first is actually about the revenue per available.
It is.
Yeah. And
what I'm going to do first, Jane, actually, because I think it's important for the audience, is just to give a bit more detail in terms of who we surveyed. Because I think once the audience understand who we surveyed, then I think that will help the audience appreciate the importance of this topic. So just really some information for everyone out there. You know, we conducted this survey between September and October last year, and we focused only on hotel executives and decision makers. So actually our previous report 12 months ago was consumers, was the guest. This time we've changed that and diverted our attention to the executives and decision makers. This was also a global reach out to those executives and decision makers, whereas before we'd only done the UK. So again, just to give you some appreciation, we surveyed just shy of 500 hotel executives and decision makers. 300 or so were from North America. More than 100 were from this region, the UK and Europe, and 82 was from Asia. All right. So hopefully that just gives everyone on this webinar some perspective, perhaps, in terms of, key people and key organizations responding to what we believed was a very important survey. But you're right, Jane. When we conducted this study, we did split it, not deliberately perhaps, but it evolved as we got more and more information back. But ultimately, we split it into 5 sections. And you're right, that the first section, if I can be allowed to perhaps continue, was revenue beyond the room. And I guess before I talk about revenue beyond the room, I'm just going to provide a little anecdotal story. And I'm sure that every single one of our attendees on this call has attended conferences over the years, and we've all sat and we've listened to individuals present their findings on how well our industry is doing, either locally, regionally, or globally. And this particular event I go to, it's my 4th year. It was November last year, and I sit there, and I always look forward to this presentation. Lasts about 40 minutes, and yes, we go through the global landscape of the industry, and we hear how well the hotels are performing in terms of revenue per room, average room rate. And actually each year I sit there and I think, no one ever talks about the guests. No one ever talks about the guests. Surely this will be the year that actually someone talks about the guests. Anyway, that wasn't the case in November. And just like in previous years, I caught up with the individual that presented what was actually a very good report and presentation. And I said, surely, the organization that you represent, it's about time you presented a guest-centric set of metrics. He said, we can't do that. What do you mean you can't do that? He said, well, we just can't obtain the data. We just have to get the room data, and that's all we can do. I said, but surely that's wrong. Surely the guest is the most important piece in the jigsaw puzzle. Well, I get that, he said, but we just don't have the technology to be able to do that. And I thought that was quite an important point. And he made a commitment to each other. I said, right, this time next year when you present, it has to be the first time that you present guest detail. And we shook hands on it. All right. So watch this space. All right. And hopefully come November, we'll at least have some element of global metrics associated with guest spend. But whilst I think that was an important point, we have to move away from the per room metric. I don't think it's going to disappear. It's obviously a relevant metric that we should use, but it's not the only important metric that we must use going forward. Now, for a lot of hoteliers out there, perhaps at the minute, it's just not possible. All right. It's not possible because they have perhaps either a complicated or inefficient or archaic tech stack that just doesn't present the opportunity to provide this information. The closest we can get is obviously through CRM solutions that have existed in the market for a long time and absolutely have a place in the market. The challenge is the way in which we get this data to CRM systems. It's not in a real-time mode. It's coming from many, many different systems. And if you compare that to an integrated PMS platform that connects all revenue streams, all right, and provides guest spending patterns across all touch points, life becomes a lot simpler and a lot easier. And rather than look back at how we've done things for the last 2-3 decades, we should look forward to try and simplify our operation, but for the benefit of the guest, our opportunity to make more money, to drive efficiencies, all right, and hopefully the guest sees the difference as well. But that's fundamentally where that revenue per guest comes from. We have to understand how we leverage the data, that it's not just about the room, it's about the trends, behaviors across all touch points, and how can we leverage information to then provide meaningful experiences to the guest. All right. And, you know, a lot of our customers now will look at a revenue per guest model, and that is what they will focus on. So yeah, revenue per guest is absolutely a metric that, you know, needs to go forward. And just finishing off in terms of the findings on this particular section, 82% of those 500 recognize the need to move beyond traditional metrics like RevPAG. So they already know that this is an archaic method and we've got to move forward. 72% are ready to invest in that technology infrastructure, and 56% feel that the technology is unprepared for transition. So a lot to do. But the interesting point was the industry recognizes it's time to move forward and not to tread water, stay static, and just do the same things that we've done year after year, because that's not going to protect this industry for the future.
Brilliant. Okay,
Does
so
that
yeah,
help?
technology, a lot about technology there, which takes us very neatly actually onto your second prediction about integration. And I'm so glad the word interfaces seems to have just kind of just fizzled out a bit, and we're all about integration now finally. But can you say a little bit more about your second big point about technology integration?
Yeah, I will. And look, with technology integration, you know, hotels will absolutely prioritize connected technology platforms. And the reason they'll do that is because we have to eliminate these multiple silos of data that exists in all of the operations across our industry. It's far too many. So let me just give you some stats first. 72% of executives plan to enhance their infrastructure. That's positive. All right. They absolutely, again, appreciate the need to move forward. 68% aim for technology serving operational and future needs. So again, if we have the right technology infrastructure in place, we can again begin to focus better on how we operationally attend to our guests and how we can drive those efficiencies. And 56% of them absolutely preferred a single end-to-end solution. All right. So again, let's just think about those silos. All right. And if we think back to CRM capability emerged in our industry because it was important to consolidate those silos of data as those applications grew across the hotel technology stack. And as those integrations and applications grew, we had to do something about it to try and get all those applications back in one place. All right. And that meant quite a few things. That meant quite a few integrations, quite a bit of heartache probably for our IT colleagues that had to look after them. Depending on the level of integrations, probably meant that not every single integration fired at the same time in the same way to the level of satisfaction. But ultimately, it did produce a result. All right. It did produce a result, but it produced a post-stay result. All right. It produced a result that was beyond the moment that that guest was in the hotel. All right. And again, this isn't me saying that CRM doesn't have a life in this industry. It does. It does have a need in this industry. But we were then analyzing, you know, potentially in some respects, some fragmented data or, you know, everything in one place that was there to assess how we approached, targeted and marketed to customers to return. All right. And it was important ultimately to understand what we could do there and then. And I will come on to that a bit more. But ultimately, if we could remove through a single platform integrations, not only could we reduce the heartache of our IT individuals that were continually involved in, you know, maintenance or challenges, we could reduce the third parties that were involved. And if we think about development, here's a good point. The rate at which multiple partners develop their product the rate at which they want to update those integrations, the surprises that come from no one communicating, all right? And actually all this burden is typically put upon the IT personnel. If we think about post-COVID and how the IT industry in our sector has changed in terms of not everyone is blessed with IT managers in every property, it remains vitally important that we reduce the complexities and increase the efficiencies, all right? But if we could have a constant development through a single platform, if we can reduce the integrations, all right, and if we can have all of that information residing in one place, even if it's necessary to still send it to a marketing platform of some description, surely that's a better route forward for the next 20 years than what we've been doing in the last 10 years. So integration, watch out. We have to reduce it. And I think I've talked to 3 people in the last 6 months. One had integrations, I think around somewhere between 15 and 20. One hotel had 60 integrations, which I thought was, well, off the scale. But perhaps that's not unique. I'm sure there are others out there. But I think the average was about 15 or so, and that's across the board. But if we could significantly reduce that, you know, it really does open the doors for a much more amenable way of being able to interact and understand our guests more. And I'll talk a little bit more about real-time data shortly, but integration per se, it's time to change again. We've got to reduce it and not think about what we had to do 20 years ago. We must carry on doing that now. Technology and advancements in architecture help us remove that challenge.
Cool. Your third prediction takes us right back to the guest and experiences. And as you said at the beginning, my experience, which is definitely something that's been highlighted as important to Generation Z or Z, however you want to say it. But how can technology help deliver experiences? I've always sort of perceived that's more of a human-led personal thing from the front desk, but I think you're going to contradict me with your prediction.
Oh, I would never want to do anything like that. So let me give you some stats. So yes, data-driven guest experiences, you know, and again, you know, when we've talked about data, well, in fact, everyone's talked about data for the last 10, 20 years and it being the gold, the oxygen, I don't know, whatever phrase we need to coin. But perhaps for us, it's the new currency of hospitality, all right? Perhaps for us, if you know, interrogated and crunched in the right way, it is going to provide a meaningful result that helps us understand how we need to interact with our customer. And that's actually quite an important point as well in terms of how we should interact with them. But in terms of the findings, 68% of executives prioritized enhancing the guest experience, fairly obvious. 64% aim to leverage data effectively. Now, I remember about a year ago, again, I was with a resort hotel that had so much data at their disposal from all their applications, so much. And I don't know whether this transcends across the industry to a great degree, but ultimately they came back to the fact that when they did their marketing initiatives, they used the first and last name and email address. All right. But they had all this data, but it was just becoming too much data. All right. So, and we'll have heard those stories before. But 61% focus on increasing the guest experience. So what I wanted to just talk about here was really ensuring that whilst that CRM, that above property capability to target guests to return, all right, was complemented by what can we do when the guests are in the hotel, all right? If we think again about our own consumer experiences, when we're emotionally attached or involved in a subject, that's the best opportunity for us perhaps to part with money, all right? So those money moments, those emotional moments. And if I'm pushing information to a third-party product that's going to give me a result in a few weeks' time, it's not going to help me in the moment, all right? So with a single platform, that information exists, whether that be in analytical format, dashboard format, and it allows the operators to determine, based on information that's presented to them, how I should interact with guests in particular ways. Now, one of the advancements in the world today is AI. And I'm not going to talk too much about our exciting AI initiatives, but I'll talk about one. We worked with a significant resort in taking and extracting the data from that single platform. And through the advancements in AI, understanding within their guest profile information, the propensity or percentage, perhaps, of guests that were currently in the hotel and to what extent they were prepared to part with further money. What I mean by that is that you might have Jane and Matthew sitting in the lounge one afternoon, but actually the data suggests that if you approach Jane and Matthew, the likelihood of them having afternoon tea, all right, today is very likely, all right. And whether I do that through a digital mechanism, i.e., provide that through an email or an app-based notification, or God forbid in today's world, actually go over and talk to them, all right. What we found was that this particular resort could identify a further 10% of annual revenue, all right, as a result of understanding the trends and behaviors of their guests whilst they were staying in the hotel. Once they've left the hotel, we can't get any more money off of them until we try and entice them back. But actually, while they're enjoying your property, that's the moment that we should really leverage. And actually, through using AI, we were able to determine that actually the percentage of us having afternoon tea was 90%. All right, it wasn't 20%. So we could actually put a percentage against it as well, knowing how much they would So my point being is that those data-driven guest experiences aren't all about post-stay, and actually we've got an opportunity to only entice so many people back. But actually, let's get hold of these people whilst they're there and use meaningful data to be accurate in the way in which we engage with those customers. And that's something we're actively involved in. It's really exciting as well, really exciting. So yes, data-driven guest experiences.
Fantastic, brilliant. Time is marching on. If we're going to have time for questions, we might need to, I think you've covered a lot, but the fourth point, we mustn't leave any of these out.
No, I can speed up.
Digital transformation, something that means something different to everybody. Yes. In your prediction, what does it mean for Agilysys, and what do you predict will happen with digital transformation in 2025?
Yeah, I think, first of all, let me give you some stats again. 45% of PMS systems are over 5 years old. 38% review systems every 4 years or longer, and 62% prioritize minimizing disruption. Completely get that. PMS and perhaps associated solutions, the heartbeat of a hotel. Let's not create too much disruption. But I think some of those stats suggest that actually either there's hesitation in wanting to move because of that disruption. And if there's hesitation year on year, these hoteliers and these properties are going to get left behind in really having the efficient methods of approaching and understanding the guests. All right. And, for us as technology providers, advancements mean that actually migrating from one system to another is a lot easier than it used to be. All right. It's not a significant upheaval. I mean, I've been involved in those. I'm sure you have, Jane, in years gone by as well. It's I guess an era that we live in now where cloud-based solutions, intuitive UIs, browser-based products, single platform implementations mean that those upheavals within those properties aren't as challenging as they once were. And I think as we progress throughout 2025, it's really important that these hoteliers consider how they future-proof their business for the next 5 years, for the next 10 years. And I guess they've got two choices, right? You either stick with these multiple products, all bandaged together, all integrating and all firing information in different ways, and we'll have our IT personnel, patch it up and keep it running. Or do we start investigating? Do we start investigating what's going to help our business move forward? And to be honest, that is ultimately what should be happening in this industry. We've got to catch up with the retail industry, Jane. All right. The retail industry has been ahead for too long. And we always say that we're catching up. It's time for this industry to lead. All right. It's time for us to tell the retail industry what we need to be doing. All right. And this is the basis of some of our findings.
Brilliant. Okay. And the last point, because we have got some questions coming in.
Okay.
The last point following digital transformation is back to the guest, which, as you said at the start, hospitality is all about the guest. But this time it's more about culture from the hospitality givers, the hoteliers, the staff. Do you want to talk a little bit more about all of that? Then we'll
Yes, sure. Yeah, again, look, it's shifting from guest-centric operations. It's shifting from room revenue to that total guest value. And again, thinking about the guests everywhere and anywhere they go in your property. 63% of those 500 prioritized increased rebookings. And actually, it's a good point. You know, this year, retaining customers is probably more important and less cost than finding new ones. And again, of course, finding new ones is also important, but we've got to retain our existing customers. And I truly believe, as an ex-hotelier, that if someone has a good stay, that sale has already been completed. They're going to return. They're going to return. But we've got to look after that existing client base. 61% said we've got to focus on revenue growth, and 68% emphasize guest experience improvement as an absolute priority. And again, I think it's a tough world out there. Economically, it's a tough world economically as we go into 25. But we absolutely have to, again, just ensure that from a guest-centric perspective, we're prepared. It's a mindset shift. Yeah, continue to do the things of old will not protect you for the future. I think that's why, you know, moving forward, it's such an important subject, a subject that I'm very passionate about. That, yeah, we've got to ensure that the operation is protected. We've got to ensure that the operation has the data at their fingertips that helps them as hoteliers, as property owners, look after the guests in their establishment. It's key.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, much cheaper to have returning loyal guests. But yeah, as you say, very important to find new guests too, to come and fill your properties. Brilliant. That does put it in a nutshell, doesn't it? And I know there's a lot more detail. And we have had questions coming in throughout, actually. And one, hello, David, came in very early on. He was talking about RevPAG and some watchwords for 2025 in agreement with you. But he had a specific question about those who you surveyed across the globe. And he asks, were those existing Agilysys product users or more generic? And the second part of the question, was there a blend of small hotels, large hotels, individually owned, corporately owned? So two questions.
Yeah. Sure. So the answer to the first question is no. They were across the board. It was important for us to understand, I guess, the global landscape. It wasn't a survey commissioned specifically for Agilysys clients at all. We try and actually steer clear of that, because obviously it helps us understand that the wider industry, in this example, on a global scale. So no was the answer to that question. The second point, just remind me, Jane.
Was there a blend of smaller and larger?
Oh yes, yeah, absolutely. So we range from small to boutique hotels and all the way up. But the important point was that there were decision makers, owners, executives of organizations that we surveyed. So again, the caliber of the individual was strong.
Yes, because it's very niche, actually, isn't it? Getting people that are making decisions about technology in hotels. There aren't, you know, we
Yes.
couldn't have interviewed thousands because there weren't thousands out there to interview, even globally, probably. So another question here is about your comments on integration being the holy grail. I don't think you used that word, but what about if your budget won't allow, I think this hotelier is saying their budget doesn't allow them to change everything. And what's the most important thing if they're to embark on, I guess, a digital transformation? What would you say is the most important bit to get right first?
Okay. Well, maybe I'm going to be a bit controversial here, as I think off the top of my head. I think when it comes to budgets, I think the individual that's thought about that question should consider the current costs associated with ensuring that all of the current technology stack, all of the current integrations are, I guess, kept in that lights on capability, and the annual costs associated with that. Because if you reduce those integrations, you're not just reducing, I guess, the efficiencies, but you are going to find some cost savings because you're using a single platform. And again, I come back to the point, we've done this thing of old that still exists today because that's something we were forced towards because of the nature of the industry at that time and how products were developed, and we had to bolt everything in. We don't have to do that now. All right. A single platform in today's world really drives economies of scale and efficiencies commercially. So I would put it to that person that from a budget perspective, there could be cost savings. And yeah, as I said, the efficiencies going forward. I think the second point in terms of what would you do first, I think really comes down to an individual conversation. All right. We have experience of customers right now, today in the UK, installing in excess of 15 different elements to their operation. And I use and choose those words widely because of that single platform. In the old language, it would have been, a PMS in the middle and 14 different products that sit around the edge with 14 or 15 different integrations. But those organizations in the UK right now that are installing those products are doing it pretty much in a big bang approach. All right. Again, because in today's world, we try and simplify the implementation process. We simplify the training process as well. We're browser-based, intuitive UIs. However you use your phone these days is how you may see how screens and our applications work. But that might not be right for all. And the benefit that we can bring is if there are particular products that need to exist within that single platform for a period of time, we can ensure that they're involved in it and exchange data in the same way that we would say between an F&B system or a PMS system or a PMS system and a spa system, until such time as they really and truly want to benefit from the complete single platform. So I guess it's horses for courses, and we've done that deliberately because, yeah, not every hotel is going to come up with the same decision. So there's flexibility, but yeah, we've got examples of the big bang and we've got examples of a more pragmatic approach. But the fundamental piece is, I've been involved in PMS installations from years gone by. It's a lot easier to replace your PMS system now than it was 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, thank goodness. Thank goodness. And yeah, that's a great answer, actually, because I think probably a lot of people will look at one element of it and say, well, that's what we're paying currently and that's what this is. And it doesn't compare, but looking at the bigger picture, what I thought you were going to say is the cost of not doing it is more expensive because of the risk that by not keeping up with technology. I guess that's a point too. But yeah, great answer. Great answer to that one. I think we've probably got time for one, maybe two more. Let me just have a look at these. I think it's probably a quick one. Do you think all of this can be applied to a single hotel as well as to a chain of properties?
Absolutely. It's designed for all properties, all eventualities. And again, it's the mindset shift. All right. It's the mindset shift from what we think we know from the last 10, 15 years to what we should know to protect our properties for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And everything I've talked about today applies and benefits, a 40-bedroom boutique hotel up to a 4,500 corporate chain globally. All right. It's very much a scalable solution.
Yeah.
And, the benefits obviously are scalable depending on the size of the organization. So yeah, 100%.
Brilliant. Yes, I think there's been a big shift in that as well over the years. This is so often asked, this one. Can good technology reduce headcount? I have a very stock answer to this. I wonder if it's the same as yours. Do you want to give it a go?
I was going to ask you to go first there, actually, Jane. Well, yes, it is. And funnily enough, we're involved in a discussion at the minute where I think you tend to find from a consumer angle, the experience that the consumer has in interfacing to hotels and properties can be pretty seamless. All right, it's important for that to be seamless because that's the guest, right? But behind the scenes, it could be a little bit more challenging in terms of how we're plugging all these things together. And a particular conversation we're having at the minute is where reservations come in and how they're then put into other systems. All right. And the quantity of individuals that exists at this particular establishment that does that manual intervention is enormous.
Yeah.
And it's off the scale. All right. Our solution is, our web engine seamlessly inputting those reservations, not just into PMS, but every other facet of what makes up that guest experience. And it's happening like that. All right. So I didn't even want to think about the costs associated with labor. Now, of course, in a lot of examples, some of that labor can be redistributed to other areas of the business. That's what we try and do. But ultimately, I believe that's what's happening in a lot of organizations. Surely the customer experience that's online that can then flow through to every area of the resort and the reservations and allow that guest at the same time in real time to be able to update, manipulate. I guess if we use the analogy of the flight app, we're able to go online, book the flight, change the seat whenever we want to do. If we replicate that in our industry, that doesn't have human intervention. All right. And if we couple that with AI as well, and I know there's not enough time to talk about all the advancements we're making in AI, we can absolutely reduce headcount or, of course, redistribute resources to other areas of a client's business to help them, perform better, perhaps. But yes, absolutely, 100%.
Yes, yeah. And my stock answer, just for what it's worth, is that but the better technology is it frees up the staff from the sort of mundane, as you say, transferring reservations from one system to another for whatever reason, to do what we do best, which is be hospitable and look after the guest.
Yes.
And yes, I remember in years gone by how if a guest could cancel their reservation for whatever reason, but if they had a golf tee time attached to it or a spa treatment, they wouldn't get cancelled at the same time.
No.
And of course, the responsibility is not going to be the guest. He's made his cancellation if he made it in one. But of course, this is the answer that's going to solve those problems as well, isn't it? There is one last question. Well, there's two actually. It's a really quick answer. Where do you draw the line between personalization and being creepy? That's one that I come across all the time, but just a snippet of an answer because we are running out of time.
Yeah, I mean, it is a blend, right? I mean, as consumers, we have control over what information we want to part with. I always find actually that if we are engaged and receptive to an experience, we're typically more willing to part with more information because we in turn want that better experience, that my experience. If it's a experience that hasn't been a good one, then of course the reverse applies. But I acknowledge it's a balance. I guess fundamental decisions sit with the consumer, the guest, and we as hoteliers have to adhere to that. But ultimately, the more information we get, the better experience we can have. And of course, as hoteliers, we want the information that's relevant to us. We perhaps don't need to know what drama series they like on Netflix, but pertinent information that's relevant to enhancing their experience whilst they're staying in a particular property is important. But look, the decision sits with the guest, the consumer. Brilliant.
Thank you. Right, there are a couple of unanswered questions, which seem to be just glancing at them AI related. So perhaps another Agilicis webinar on the advancements in that as well. But thank you, Matthew. Thank you all for listening and for putting those questions in. But some really interesting thoughts and conversations and predictions there. So that's great. I just need to say that everyone needs to remember that the opinions and stats presented today are those from Matthew and the wider Agilicis team. If you need advice, then please approach your professional advisors or come to me at Hosper for a reference. And I'm sure Matthew and his team would be delighted to hear from you too. And if you don't have Matthew's details, then please do contact me. Please take a look at the Hosper website for other upcoming events. There are quite a few already set for this year. And also on the website, you can find recordings of our previous webinars on hosper.org, and this will be there and on our YouTube channel within the next few days. But thank you, Matthew. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you
Thank
have
you,
a
Jane.
great
Thank you,
day.
everyone.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.